Imagine this. A man sits down and writes a warning. Not a guess, not a hope. A precise, detailed prediction about a city, an empire, a person who has not yet been born. He finishes writing, seals the scroll, and dies. Centuries pass. Wars are fought. Empires rise and fall. Languages disappear. And then, one by one, every single word he wrote comes true. This is not a story from a novel. This is the Bible. Today, we are going to look at 7 prophecies, written thousands of years ago, that came true with a precision no human logic can fully explain. Some fulfilled slowly, over centuries. Some fulfilled overnight, in a single act of history. And the last one is still unfolding right now. Stay with us until the end, because Prophecy 7 will make you see the world differently. Prophecy 1, the destruction of Tyre. Around 590 BC, a prophet named Ezekiel received a vision. He was not a general, not a historian, not a spy. He was a priest in exile, far from the land he loved. And yet he sat down and wrote one of the most specific predictions ever recorded in ancient scripture about a city called Tyre. Tyre was extraordinary. Built partly on the coast and partly on a rocky island just offshore, it was considered almost unconquerable. Its harbors made it the commercial heart of the Mediterranean. Kings feared it. Merchants needed it. Armies had tried and failed to destroy it for generations. And yet Ezekiel wrote this: that Tyre's stones, her timber, and her very soil would be thrown into the sea. That many nations would come against her, that she would become a bare rock, a place for fishermen to spread their nets. Strange words, almost absurd if you knew the city. For nearly 250 years, those words sat in Scripture, unproven, easy to dismiss. Then came Alexander the Great. In 332 BC, Alexander marched his army to the coast and demanded Tyre's surrender. The island city refused. They retreated behind their walls, surrounded by water, believing they were safe. Alexander made a decision that still puzzles historians. He ordered his men to demolish the ruins of the old coastal city, stone by stone, and use every piece of rubble to build a causeway stretching half a mile into the sea. They scraped the mainland clean. They threw the stones, the timber, the very dust of the old city into the water, exactly as Ezekiel had written, 250 years before. The causeway still exists today. Modern Tyre is built on a peninsula, the permanent result of what Alexander built. The specificity of this prophecy, the debris in the sea, many nations, the unique method of her fall, remains one of the most striking in all of ancient literature. And if Tyre feels like the beginning of something extraordinary, wait until you hear what was written about Babylon. Prophecy 2, the fall of Babylon. Babylon was not just a city, it was the center of the known world. At its peak, it covered over 2,000 acres. Its walls were so wide that 2 chariots could ride side by side along the top. It had the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and an army that had conquered everything in its path. Around 700 BC, over a century before Babylon even reached its full power, the prophet Isaiah wrote that Babylon would become a place of desolation, that it would never be inhabited again, that no Arab would pitch his tent there, that wild animals and owls would make their home in the ruins. Not conquered, not weakened, abandoned, forever. At the time, this sounded impossible. But in 539 BC, the Persian king Cyrus the Great diverted the Euphrates River, the very waterway that protected Babylon, and walked his army in under the gates on a dry riverbed. The city fell in a single night. From that point on, Babylon never fully recovered. It changed hands, it declined, it shrank, and eventually it was simply left. Today, the ruins of ancient Babylon sit in modern-day Iraq, empty, silent, and largely unoccupied, exactly as Isaiah described. A city that once held the world in its hands, now home only to dust and memory. But cities are one thing. What happens when a prophecy is not about a place, but about an entire people? My Prophecy 3, the rebirth of Israel. The prophet Ezekiel, writing around 593 BC, described a vision so strange that even his own people likely didn't know what to make of it. He saw a valley full of dry bones, thousands of them, scattered and lifeless across the ground. Then, before his eyes, the bones began to move, to come together. Flesh and skin covered them, and they stood up, a vast army, restored to life. And the voice in the vision told him, "These bones are the whole house of Israel." Ezekiel wrote that God would gather his people from the nations where they had been scattered, bring them back to their land, and restore them as a nation. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people lived without a homeland, scattered across Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and the Americas. Surviving, but stateless. Every empire that tried to eliminate them failed. Then, in 1948, after 2,000 years of exile, the State of Israel was officially declared. An ancient people, an ancient language, an ancient land, reunited. No other nation in recorded history has ever been destroyed, scattered across the entire world, and then reconstituted in its original land with its original language and culture intact. This had never happened before, and yet it happened. But the next prophecy is about one single man, and what was written about him centuries before he was born. Prophecy 4, the coming of the Messiah. This is perhaps the most layered prophecy in the entire Bible. It is not one prediction. It is dozens, written by different prophets, in different centuries, in different books, all pointing to the same person. The prophet Micah wrote around 700 BC that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, a small, obscure village, not Jerusalem, not a capital. Isaiah wrote that he would be born of a virgin and called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Prince of Peace. The prophet Zechariah wrote that he would enter Jerusalem riding on a donkey, that he would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, that the money would be thrown into the temple and used to buy a potter's field. The Psalms described a death where hands and feet would be pierced, where garments would be divided by casting lots, where not a single bone would be broken. Isaiah wrote of a suffering servant, one who would be beaten, mocked, and killed, and whose suffering would carry the weight of others. Then, in the 1st century AD, a man named Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem to a woman named Mary. He entered Jerusalem on a donkey. He was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. The silver was thrown back into the temple and used to buy a potter's field, exactly as Zechariah described. He was crucified. His hands and feet were pierced. Soldiers cast lots for his clothing. His bones were not broken. The statistical probability of one person fulfilling even 8 of these prophecies by chance has been calculated by mathematicians, and the number is astronomically large. Whether you believe or question, the alignment is extraordinary. And now we arrive at a prophecy spoken not by an ancient scribe, but by Jesus himself. Prophecy 5, the destruction of Jerusalem. It was around 30 AD. Jesus and his disciples were walking near the great temple of Jerusalem, one of the most magnificent structures in the ancient world. The stones were enormous, some weighing hundreds of tons. The walls rose high above the city. The disciples looked up in awe, and Jesus said something that stopped them cold. He told them that the day was coming when not one stone of this temple would be left upon another, that Jerusalem would be surrounded by armies, that its people would fall by the sword or be taken captive among the nations. The disciples must have struggled to believe it. This was the heart of their world, the holiest place in Judaism. Destroy the temple, level the stones. It seemed unthinkable. 40 years later, in 70 AD, the Roman general Titus besieged Jerusalem. After months of brutal siege, his legions broke through the walls. The temple was set ablaze, and when the smoke cleared, the soldiers dismantled what remained, stone by stone, searching for gold that had melted into the cracks during the fire. Not one stone was left upon another. Every word Jesus had spoken came true. But the prophecy that follows is not about destruction. It sounds more like our world today than anything else we have read. Prophecy 6. The explosion of knowledge. The prophet Daniel lived in the 6th century BC, a Jewish exile who rose to prominence in the courts of Babylon and Persia. He wrote prophecies so precise that later scholars, unable to believe they were written in advance, argued the book must have been composed after the events it described. But one prophecy in Daniel is different from all the others. It speaks not of a city or a king or a battle. It speaks of an era. In the final chapter of his book, Daniel wrote that in the time of the end, many would travel to and fro, and knowledge would increase. For thousands of years, human progress was remarkably slow. The world of 1700 AD was not dramatically different from the world of 700 BC. People traveled by horse. Information spread by hand-copied texts. Most people lived and died within a few miles of where they were born. Then something changed. Beginning in the 18th century and accelerating through the 19th and 20th, human knowledge began to expand at a rate that has no historical parallel. The printing press, the steam engine, the telegraph, the telephone, the airplane, the internet. Today, more information is created every 2 days than existed in all of human history, up to the year 2003. For over 2,000 years, Daniel's words sat quietly in Scripture. And then the modern world arrived, and they became literally true. But it is what comes next that may be the hardest to consider calmly. Because Prophecy 7 has not finished yet. Prophecy 7, Signs of the End Times. No prophecy in Scripture has generated more discussion, more debate, and more reflection than the words of the final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Written by the Apostle John on the island of Patmos around 95 AD, it describes a sequence of events that would precede what the Bible calls the end of the age. Wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, earthquakes, famines, and plagues in various places. A world in which no one could buy or sell without a mark tied to their identity. For most of human history, many of these signs were simply the background noise of civilization. Wars had always existed. Famines had always existed. But the idea of a global system of commerce, where buying and selling is tied to individual identification, was essentially impossible to imagine in any pre-modern context. Ancient economies were local, barter-based, disconnected. Today, we live in a world of digital finance, biometric identification, and global economic systems that are tightly interconnected in ways John could never have experienced. Whether these are the precise fulfillments John described, or whether the full meaning of his vision still lies ahead, is a question Christians have debated for centuries. But one thing is difficult to deny. We are living in an era unlike any that came before it. A time when a single event, a pandemic, a financial collapse, a conflict can affect every nation on earth at once. And somewhere in the back of every honest mind is a question that refuses to stay silent. What if someone, thousands of years ago, actually saw this coming? Outro 7 Prophecies. One city scraped into the sea, one empire that simply ceased to exist, one nation reborn after 2,000 years, one man whose life matched dozens of ancient descriptions, one temple whose destruction was announced 40 years before it happened, one era of knowledge explosion that a prophet glimpsed across 26 centuries, and one final vision of a world that looks, in certain ways, very much like our own. You do not have to believe all of this is divine to find it extraordinary. But if you do believe, then these pages are not just history. They are a map. And the question is not whether the map is accurate. The question is, where are we on it? If these prophecies moved something in you, a question, a doubt, a sense of wonder, that feeling is worth following. Subscribe and stay with us, because in the next video, we are going to open a book that the church tried to erase from history for over 1,500 years. A book that describes what the fallen angels did on earth and why someone decided the world was not ready to know. We will see you there.